Hey there, my name's Danny Leibrandt, and you are listening to The Local Marketeer, where we host local marketing experts every week. Today, I am with Greg Sterling. I am really excited about this episode. Greg has been in local marketing for over 25 years, particularly a local marketing analyst, and is currently the co-founder of Near Media, where they help multi-location brands maximize investments in search. Greg started Near Media just over 4 years ago with two other local marketing experts, which you guys probably know, Mike Blumenthal, which I had on the podcast, and David Mihm. He also co-hosts the Near Memo podcast with his two co-founders, and also offers a free and paid newsletter for local marketing insights, which, by the way, everyone should go subscribe to that. He also started Local Dialogue, which is a boutique local research firm that helps track AI in the local market. So it's safe to say Greg is one of the biggest experts when it comes to local marketing. And yeah, so excited to have you on the show, Greg.
Well, thanks, Danny, for having me here. It's fun to be here and fun to talk about all these things. And it's amazing that I've been in the space for 25 years, given that I'm only 32. So it's just shows you that getting an early start is very helpful. Actually,
Interesting.
actually, I'm not 32, but
I believed you.
yeah. You really believe that I was 32? So that would make
I
me like
did.
seven years old. I was just an unbelievable prodigy. At 7, other kids were in elementary school, and I was managing, sort of local marketing. So
No, that's hilarious. I did believe you for a second there. I was like, wait, you're 7 years old? I don't know.
yeah,
I mean, it still
I
seems
have
like
some
you're.
I, I have some property in Florida that I'd like to sell to you. I think we can talk about that after the show.
Okay, okay.
All right.
All right. So, yeah, Greg, I'd like to dive into your journey. So, being in local marketing for over 25 years, can you tell me kind of how that transpired, how you initially got into local marketing?
Yeah, I'm going to try and do the semi short version of all this. So, uh, I was in college. I was sort of a politics and philosophy major, and I went to law school, and then I became a lawyer. And I was a lawyer for almost 9 years. I did civil litigation, so tried cases and you know took depositions and all of that stuff. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Took me a very long time to get out of that. When I got out of that, I did so by doing freelance writing. So I was a content creator, and I wound up doing, this was in the very earliest days of the internet, 98, 99, and I wound up doing content creation for some internet sites. And I got hired by one of them called allbusiness.com, which is actually still around, but has flipped over, has had multiple owners. But in the beginning, the idea was it was going to sort of aggregate a small business audience, and it was going to sell that audience, essentially monetize that audience to bigger companies that wanted to sell software or services to small businesses. And it was ahead of its time in a certain way. But I did a lot of the legal content and other kinds of content creation for them, and became was there for a couple of years. And then I went to a company called at the time it was called ZDTV. It was Ziff Davis Television. So it was the magazine publisher, which did tech publications, and they were doing video. And that was also kind of ahead of its time. And then it became an independent company, TechTV, and there were a whole bunch of shows on there about the internet. And it was like, can you imagine the crudeness of the content in like 99, 2000? It was just very early. And I was a producer on one of the shows called Working the Web. And I ran the website and generated the web content with some other people. And so there was a companion TV show and web content. So it was this attempt to sort of marry the two. And it was all about small business and how they can leverage the web and do e-commerce. And it was like 7, 8 years ahead of the right time for this. And then I went to an analyst firm, a small analyst firm, like Forrester, Gartner, those guys, IDC. But this was called the Kelsey Group, and they were small, and they were focused on the Yellow Pages industry and to some degree newspapers. So the idea there was, how is the internet impacting those traditional media businesses? And I was initially kind of an editorial person, managing editor there, but then shifted over into the role of an analyst. And I think this is going to sound like a boastful or a false claim, but I think that I was the first person to write to ever write a white paper about local search and whether local search was going to be a threat to Yellow Pages and newspapers, the traditional media industry. And believe it or not, in those days, this is like 2002, 3-ish now, believe it or not, that was an open question because traditional media had salespeople, they had a lot of content, they had all these small business relationships, and Google and comparable entities didn't have any of that. They had no salespeople, they had no real local content in those days, and there was a question about whether or not they were going to be able to deliver the kind of experience for consumers that would cause adoption of those media and what they had to offer to small business advertisers. And one of the central issues in those days was that the small business could not see their ad in these media, whether it was a display ad or a search ad. Overture was sort of preceded Google, and it was the first kind of paid search platform. And the challenge was that the small business couldn't see the evidence of their ad, right? In traditional media, you can see the ad on TV or hear it on the radio or see it in the Yellow Pages or in the newspaper, but they couldn't see it on online because it was dynamic. And this was a big issue and a big challenge. And there were a number of interesting solutions to try and deal with that early on. So I was there at the Kelsey Group for about 6 years, and I ran conferences for them and did reports and help do research. And then I left and I did consulting for quite a while, actually, on my own. And it was really sort of advising companies that were trying to reach small business sellers, or some companies trying to come into the United States market in a number of cases. And I did a lot of work, a lot of different types of work for different companies. I did some research for some companies, consumer surveys, small business surveys, and after that, we're kind of inching up on the present here, so it's not going to take too much longer. After that, I was hired by what was the old Yellow Pages Trade Association, but became the Local Search Association, to be the VP of strategy, and did conferences for them, did research, did a lot of interesting things there. We had a lot of interesting research, and at that point, this was 2014. There were still directory publishers and still agencies selling Yellow Pages, but we had a whole bunch of clients that included, or members, I should say, that included Microsoft and Google and Yelp and sort of all the big guys that were in this same space. And spent 5 years there, and those were pretty interesting times. And we did a bunch of workshops and small events around the country for small businesses, trying to educate them about digital media and marketing. And this was, this is now 2014, 15, 16, pretty late in the game, but there were still a lot of people who didn't really know a lot of stuff. And they were just one of the things that was memorable about that is that, they didn't know who we were for the most part. And it was very challenging to get them into the room. But once they got into the room and they heard presentations from a bunch of experts, you're familiar with Local U? Yeah. So it was kind of like that. And we, it was sponsored by many of these larger companies, but we tried to have really unbiased presentations, very educational presentations about a whole range of things: social media, search, paid, blogging, websites, and so on and so forth. And these business owners that came, and we usually got about 100 to 200 plus each time, were really grateful. They were really grateful for the exposure and for not being sold. Not most of what small businesses get exposure to is sales pitches, notwithstanding the efforts of Local U and Local U is really for agencies at this point, but there's just not a lot of places for small businesses to get real information. Paradoxically, there are a ton of blogs and a ton of podcasts like yours, so there are places, but there's no go-to place that people know about. You have to kind of happen upon these. So was at LSA till 2019, and then I went to work for Uberall, which is a listings and reputation management company based in Berlin, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of people that I had known from in previous jobs were there already, and that was a great place to go. I'd never worked for a European company, and it was really an interesting place to be. We did some really. I was the VP of. I think my title was like VP of Insights or something like that, and we, basically it was a content role, and I did speaking on their behalf and blogging, and we did some really interesting research when we were there, including the first report really that was ever done at this level of scale with the transparency company, which you may know or not know, as the case may be, Curtis Boyd, on review fraud on Google,
Yeah.
Yelp, Facebook, and TripAdvisor. And that was a really interesting and eye-opening report. 20 markets, 20 different categories. And then the pandemic hit, and I couldn't go to Berlin anymore, which was part of the fun.
Yeah.
And we were just, it was just relentless work. I mean, I don't know if you remember, it was just working all the time. And I kind of burned out, is the truth. And I left there in the end of 2021. And since then, I've been doing consulting and near media, and then this dialogue program that I recently co-founded with another guy that I used to work with way back in the Kelsey Group days. And so it's been an interesting time. And what we do at Near Media is, we do a couple of things, but the main thing that we do is user testing and research. So we get a client who says, I'm in healthcare or legal or some vertical, some industry, typically self-storage, restaurants, whatever. And we compile a panel depending upon the scope of the project. It can be 100, 200, multiple panels, multiple countries. And we give them a scenario. You want to remodel your kitchen, and then they go and they look at, primarily it's been focused on Google, but there are occasionally other things that we look at. And then they do a prompt. Then they do we watch them search, essentially. We watch them search, we watch them refine their queries, we watch them click, we watch their interaction with reviews and images and all these different elements on the SERP, and specifically the local SERP. This is all local stuff. And what we've observed, and they narrate these videos, and so they talk about, oh, I don't click on ads, or this one doesn't have enough reviews, or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of interesting stuff that we learn. And one of the primary takeaways from all that research cumulatively is that the consumer behavior by vertical is quite different. People sort of SEOs in general, and in the local space also, people tend to generalize, oh, people rely on reviews, or people don't go below a certain, number of results, or whatever it is, or there's zero click behavior and X% of queries result in 0 clicks. But what we found is that there's significant variation by vertical across a lot of different criteria, a lot of different issues. The things that people are relying on in any given category. Healthcare is very different, for example, from self-storage. Restaurants are very different from legal. And the same elements are in the mix, but the emphasis and how far people are going to go into the local finder, or they're going to look in the page, or whether they click through the websites, that varies considerably. And that was really one of the most interesting takeaways from all the research cumulatively. So that's kind of where we are today. And then on the AI side, what I'm doing is a lot of survey work with small businesses, agencies, large and small, franchisees, and consumers about where AI fits in the mix of what they're doing. And that's been really interesting. The most recent survey is comparing consumer search versus AI. So how are consumers interacting with search versus AI, and how do they think about the two of those things? Are they complementary? Are they overlapping? And we can talk about that if you want. There's some really interesting findings there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that thorough introduction. I feel like I fully know you now. That's great. Yeah. Then now I don't have to ask any more questions. Usually I have to keep asking follow-ups.
I haven't told you anything about my family or my pets or my interests or any of that, but we don't need to go there.
Yeah, no, we only have so much time, unfortunately. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, or at least one thing that came to mind, is I'm super involved in the home services space. Like my dad
Yeah.
owns a flooring company. I'm doing marketing for pest control companies. I'm super involved in the space. And you were talking about a ton of variation between different local industries. How about in the home services? Are the home services still very different? Because I feel like they are fairly similar, at least in terms of business models.
Well, so I'm talking about the consumer interaction with the search results and content.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't know. I'm trying to think if we've done any. Well, we have actually. We did some European research in home services. What's kind
Okay.
of remodeling, so home services adjacent. Um, and there's certain generalizations that you can make about all these industries. People care about reviews. They want to see pictures. They want they want um, um, I'm trying to think of all the things that we can say that are kind of true across the board. They will look on GBP. They'll look through images on GBP. They do click through to websites. They will. I haven't looked at that in a little while. So anyway, there's some common behaviors across across categories. In some cases they'll look at ads, other times they won't look at ads. But in home services, it's home services is one where I'm trying to think of what I can say reliably. Home services is one where reviews are obviously very, very important. Um, they don't they don't necessarily need to see images. Images are important. Um, uh, they I think they will click on ads in this category. Ads are my recollection of this European project was that we saw differences. We did 3 countries and we saw differences by country. So in some cases, brands were prominent. People clicked on brands. In some cases,
Hmm.
people were more inclined to click on ads. I mean, this was cultural differences. So it was Ireland, Germany, and France, and there were differences by country. Um, so let's sort of go deeper into that, because I'm not in a position to give local SEO advice right now on home services. It's just I haven't reviewed that study.
Yeah, yeah, no
I mean,
problem.
all the standard optimization stuff that all the best practices you need to do. I mean, there's Yelp has invested very heavily in RFP, RFQ functionality. I mean, you need to make it easier for people to contact you. One of the great challenges, I think this is especially true in home services, is that small business owners, not these private equity owned companies, because a lot of home services now are being rolled up into private equity,
Hmm.
and even though they may retain their brands. And so what you get in that situation is you get deployment of SaaS solutions, and so there's some sophisticated infrastructure that's often being used. But in a true independent business, what often happens there is that they simply don't return calls fast enough.
Mm.
They get calls, and people are really eager to get a response. And sometimes these businesses, because they're busy, or because they're out in the field on a job, or because they don't want to be interrupted, will wait 24 hours or even longer, 48 hours, 72 hours. And by that time, they've really lost the job. And there's a lot of money left on the table because people are not responding to leads quick enough. And there are software solutions that can address that.
Yeah, no, I've seen that's a huge problem, specifically in home services, because at
Yes.
least these smaller companies, it's usually the owner that's picking up the phone until he's
Right.
got like a few employees, maybe he has some technicians. Now he's not so involved. Now maybe he's in the marketing or just kind of overseeing the team. So yeah, okay, cool. That makes complete sense. And
I mean,
then what?
go ahead.
No,
No,
you go
go.
ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I'm not pitching any particular product or anything, but there are sort of some low-cost chat solutions that can be used. Those live on the website. Um, now I think Google's tied in with WhatsApp messaging. So those are the kinds of things that you need to explore. Is having something on your site, or having some sort of messaging on your phone that can capture, recorded system that can capture leads and give somebody a sense that you're going to get back to them,
Yeah.
and do so within a pretty reasonable time frame. I mean, there's a direct correlation between how quickly businesses respond to leads and who gets the job. I mean, when a
Yeah.
consumer is there at the computer and they're looking for 3 or 4 estimates on something, or 3 or 4 businesses to talk to, the ones that respond the quickest, that have decent reviews, are typically going to get the work. So, you're SOL if you wait 48 or 72 hours.
Yeah. Well, I think a big solution to this that probably will come out mainstream this year, if not this year, the next year, will be essentially AI answering bots, where
Yeah.
AI is answering the calls. And I wouldn't say it's quite there. Some people are saying it's there. I think it has a little bit of time to go. It just has a slight delay, can still give good responses, and it kind of sounds like a human. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. I mean, because that's just my limited opinion, but I know you're super involved in this. What do you think of the AI agents or AI answering the phone call?
Well, I mean, I think it's good. I mean, I think if the differences between not answering the call, not getting the lead, and giving the consumer some sort of confidence that you're going to get back to them, or giving them a way to get basic information about your business. Sometimes what people want is just some basic questions answered. I think it's something definitely to do. Google had a solution that was really interesting, and I forget what it was called. And then they jettisoned it, and now I think it's an independent company. It was an AI based answering service, essentially, and it had all kinds of capabilities, customization. And there are multiple companies offering a version of this, but Google had this, and it was a separate subscription. It wasn't bundled into anything. I mean, it wasn't like part of Google Workspace or anything. You had to pay for it, but it was a pretty cool and useful tool. But they didn't hang on to it, I guess, because it wasn't going to bring in millions of dollars or whatever. And I think the guy who was leading it internally took it out as a separate company, and I can't remember what the brand is. But 100%. I mean, in my AI research with small businesses, they are all totally aware of AI. They don't always know what it can do. They don't always know how to use it, but the awareness level is unprecedented versus other sort of historical marketing innovations. And they're more or less eager to deploy it where it can help them be more efficient. Excuse me. And so, yes, absolutely. Over the course of the next year or so, we'll see more and more of that sort of thing. In fact, restaurants now often are deploying these kinds of solutions. They're being provided by vendors that are in the space,
Mm-hmm.
and they have no human that answers the phone at all.
Hmm.
And as AI gets more and more sophisticated, it can do things like it can take reservations now. You can answer basic questions, you can field certain kinds of inquiries, and you could capture customer leads with AI, just simply through a voice interactive system. Tell me what your name is, tell me what your problem is, tell me what, how quickly do you need a solution. Like the lead gen sites like Angie and Home Advisor actually, they have these wizards where you fill out, Thumbtack, I think, does this, where you fill out what your needs are, and Yelp does a version of this too. And then they funnel it to a bunch of advertisers. And you can capture that same information using a kind of a voice-based system that people would access on the phone.
Interesting. Okay. And have you guys done any research on this, of how people are reacting to this, and can they tell whether it's AI or not?
Well, not specifically about the consumer buyer side of it in terms of their acceptance of AI solutions. I mean, I think there's some customer ambivalence about AI, and I think it really depends on the context. There's some research on this, which I did not do. So in certain cases, people really are very receptive to AI. In other cases, they're ambivalent about it. And when it comes to products plus AI, like toaster with AI, microwave with AI, those kinds of things, they're they're less interested. But when it comes to something that's genuinely helpful to them, then they are interested. And so I think the consumer response will be, I mean, remember that Google had the restaurant reservation tool, whatever the hell that was called. Um, uh, uh,
Um,
it
was
didn't.
it
It
Open
was like
Table?
No, 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 no. It was no. It was you were supposed to call, and then the AI assistant. It was a version of Google Assistant, right? The AI assistant would call the business and do the inquiry on your behalf or make the reservation on your behalf. But it didn't
Hmm.
take off, and so they rolled it out to a few categories, and I think people just didn't use it. But this is definitely something that will be more and more prevalent in the future because you know business owners will deploy AI wherever they can gain efficiency, wherever they can reduce costs, and they understand that instinctively about these tools. They just don't know all the solutions that are available. And often what's going to happen is that existing vendors that they work with, if they work with a software provider, will add on some kind of additional AI capability.
Yeah.
It's happening
Yeah.
pretty
Okay.
quickly.
Awesome. Yeah, I think call answering in particular is going to be something that's going to develop very quickly, probably by the end of this year. Is there anything else that you've seen that's developing that's going to be a pretty universal use case for local businesses?
Well, it's the friction around creating websites is getting reduced with
Mm.
AI, right? I mean, Wix has this, Squarespace has this. There's a tool called Solo AI. I think the website is Soloist, and that was started by a guy named Raj Singh, who is a serial entrepreneur, but it's under the umbrella of Mozilla, so it's within Mozilla, and that's a really simple, really fast website creation tool for services providers, and it has limited choices that you can make, but you can build a site literally in minutes. And so web development is becoming simpler and simpler and simpler and more DIY. In terms of marketing, there are a bunch of companies now that I have talked to and some that I know about that are trying to simplify marketing for small businesses by automating as much as possible. Now,
Hmm.
more of that exists on the paid side than organic, but people are trying to really radically simplify campaign creation and marketing. You have one of the central challenges of being a marketer today, regardless of whether you're an enterprise or a small business, is there's just too many freaking channels that you have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
deal with. I mean, we're talking about a local SEO, and the world is Google and Google business profiles to a lot of local businesses. But
Hmm.
actually, the number one marketing channel for SMBs is social, and GBP sort of falls down the list. So it's like, social and email and paid social and paid search, and then you get business profile management and then a bunch of other stuff. And so business owners don't have time. If they don't have time to answer the phone, they certainly don't have time to do a sophisticated campaign on multiple channels. And
Hmm.
so those kinds of tools that will make it possible for them to repurpose content or to more easily create marketing for different channels, I think will become more common. But it's a noisy market already with AI. A new sort of next generation AI tools, AI SaaS or AI first companies or whatever you want to call them. It's already really noisy, and there's an awareness problem. Which tools should I use? Does something exist? Which one should I use? That's the SaaS problem in general, and it's kind of multiplied in an AI context because there's not a lot of awareness and there's no real track record. Um, I'm trying to evaluate some no code chatbot creation tools right now,
Hmm.
and you can't tell them apart. You have to get in and actually use them to start really understanding what the differences are, and business owners don't have time for that.
Yeah, no, definitely. Everything's evolving so fast, and at least what I like about the local space is that it's moving a little bit slower. Where like e-commerce, SaaS, they're all moving incredibly fast. They're at the very edge of technology. So at least we're a little bit slower. We can be slightly slower to adapt, but I agree, things are coming super fast. It's hard
Ex-
to keep up.
ex- Except that Google is now, fooling around with the UI because of ChatGPT, competitive pressure.
Hmm.
First they felt like, oh, TikTok is taking all the young people away from Google, so now we got to throw Reddit and short video into search results. No, seriously, they put a whole bunch of crap in the SERP because they thought that was going to keep people there. And then ChatGPT came along, and it's like, now we've got to build out AI overviews, and we've got these AI organized pages, and they introduced a feature called Ask Maps, which allows you to query an individual profile, which is not fully rolled out, but we've talked about it a little bit on Near Media, and it's a really potentially useful thing for consumers. You can ask questions, and it relies on the website and reviews, and sometimes third-party content, social content. So it's true that local maybe is not moving as fast as some segments, but it's definitely evolving. And it's not going to be the same as it was, for sure.
Well, can you talk about that more? Like, where do you see local going in the next few years?
Well, so I think there's a kind of paradox at Google. Google now, if you try and say to if you think about what is the competitive differentiator that Google has, it's these knowledge graphs, right? They have all this data, and specifically local. They have better and more local data, really, arguably, than anybody else. Microsoft has a lot of data, Apple has a lot of data, Yelp has data, but nobody has the kind of comprehensive data set that they do. And so that is their big differentiator versus something like ChatGPT or some of the others. And that's one of the reasons why they probably are doing this whole JavaScript thing to block people from scraping them, is because they don't want their content to be incorporated into these other competitive sites. But so having said all that, I think that that's a core feature of Google search that they want to maintain. Now, they also are playing with these AI organized pages. I don't know if you've seen any of those. They introduced them, they rolled them out in restaurants. And what you get is a bunch of categories and carousels. So if you look for bars in New York, they'll give you a bunch of subcategories and then carousels, bars open late, bars that have food. And so it's a kind of add steroids to the existing experience. And I think so local isn't going away. It's not going to be buried. It's not going to be reduced or marginalized, but it will evolve, and I think the AI is going to be a central feature of that, and we may see more and more verticalized experiences in Google. I think that that's something that's happening, and something that they internally recognize. They see, local is a weird thing, because it's like, is it a vertical? Is it this massive horizontal thing that has dozens and dozens or hundreds of verticals or subcategories? Yes, it is a kind of subset of the overall search world, but it is its own animal, and it has lots and lots of subsidiary categories and user behaviors. And so all of those could get slightly different treatment, which is not to say that the right approach, I think, to optimization is do all the best practices. Review, regular review cadence, lots of good high quality images, fully optimized profile. You're gonna, one of the things that AI is starting to do, I think, for local businesses is make certain directories and certain other sites relevant again. People kind of zeroed in on Google and focused pretty exclusively on Google. Now there's sort of outside information coming back. And certainly if we talk about optimizing on AI, certain directories get more visibility in AI, and ChatGPT in particular. So all the local SEO best practices will help businesses in this sort of transitional period to what we don't exactly know. But there's nothing radically different that anybody has to do. Now, AI overviews is something that nobody can control, and Google will continue to show them, because that's their ChatGPT competitor. And ranking well there is a function of doing other things well, but you don't have any way to influence, directly influence AI overviews. But if you're one of the better ranked local businesses, that maximizes the likelihood of appearing there. But they haven't really known what to do with local in AI overviews. And originally, when they had the search generative experience during that year where they were testing it, almost every single local query produced an AI overview, which was kind of a duplication of the local pack. Like most of the businesses showed up in the local pack, although there were a couple others that didn't. And then when they launched it formally at Google I/O, then all the local stuff was really gone. And that it may come back. It may start to bleed back into into AI overviews. And in fact, I mean, real estate is there, and certain other verticals that would be considered local are there.
Interesting. Okay. And is there anything in particular that people can do to show up on that AI overview, or should you just focus on your Google Business Profile and everything else, and that will kind of just happen
Well,
naturally?
I mean, again, I am not the best person there's a lot of research being done. There's a lot of companies that are, a lot of the SEO tools are doing sort of research on how do you show up and giving advice, and I'm not the best person to do that right now. I think if you do SEO best practices for your website, and you do local SEO best practices for GBP, and you build out certain key other social sites, and I mean, people are talking about Reddit, optimizing on Reddit and being present on Reddit. So you can't do everything, but if you do these sort of core things, local SEO best practices, then your chances of being in there are improved. One general piece of advice now that I think has emerged out of all the controversy that Google has been through with the antitrust trial and some of the exhibits there, and then the API leak that came out after that, and some of the other stuff that's been discussed, is that if you really need to try and build a brand, which is particularly challenging for a local business.
Mm-hmm.
Build a brand as much as possible so that people will look directly for you, which means reviews, and also build awareness on other sites, so social media and certain other sites where your audience may be, forums or content sites, local PR. Some of these things that have long been local SEO best practices, but really this is a different way to think about it. To the extent that you can build awareness of your business, whatever it is, offline activity, traditional media, digital media, then you get people who will search directly for you. And that engagement, that direct brand search, navigational search, and the engagement that comes from that will help you. I mean, we know now that Google rewards clicks and rewards engagement. And you need to engage on GBP, get reviews, respond to reviews.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pieces of one of the main findings coming out of our near media research is that this is, again, varies by category, but most of the consumer audience does not read review text. They will
Hmm.
not spend a lot of time reading reviews. What they do, they say reviews are really critical. Reviews are one of my top 2 consideration factors. But what they do is they look at stars, they look at the rating, 4.5, 4.8, 4.6, and then they look at the number of reviews. And that's how they screen out businesses. And
Hmm.
sometimes a minority, whether it's 20% or 30% or 40%, depending on the category. And this to some degree is tied to consideration. Like if you're looking for a doctor versus if you want to get, some Indian food, it's a little bit like that. Sometimes people will go in and read reviews. And typically what they do is they'll look for negative reviews or critical reviews. That's one of the things that savvy review, consumers do, is they'll look at what are the criticisms of this business, which is why it's really important to have a response, because they'll assess that. Oh, that sounds reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. That person was a lunatic, and I see that now. Whatever it was. So
Yeah. So okay, there's a lot to go off there.
yeah,
Something to touch on there is earlier in the podcast you referred to a lot of variance between different industries. Now you're kind of
right.
talking about some other industries. So we touched on home services. What about the other industries? What are the differences between them?
Well, that's hard for me to summarize really quickly, but so I'll give you a comparison. Just this is top of mind, so some of the nuance is going to be gone. Um, so self storage, or restaurants, let's call it, those categories, versus legal or home remodeling or medical. So what we saw in healthcare, we asked people to look for, there were 2 use cases. One was primary care physician, one was OBGYN. And what we saw in healthcare was that people were going deep into the local finder to find doctors that had photos and had enough reviews for them. There were a lot of doctors who don't have any reviews or who have just a tiny number of reviews. And there are a lot of doctors that don't have images. And people want to see the doctor, they want to see the offices, they want to see the staff, and they want to see enough reviews to satisfy them. And so we were seeing people going, there's always been this sort of belief that people don't click through to the Finder. They look at the top 3 in the local pack, and then they don't really go any deeper. We were seeing people go very, very deep, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling for reviews. They wanted to find doctors because it's a very important decision. And we also looked at situations where they were clicking through the websites, and they often did that in that context. And they wanted to see real photographs. They didn't want to see stock photographs. Stock photographs really turned them off because they want to see the doctor. They want to have a sense of who they're going to be seeing. And in legal, there were also very high click-throughs to the website. And in legal, we saw local services ads perform really well. That was a sort of an interesting thing. So local services ads, which will tend to get attention in a lot of categories, but in this legal category, when they showed up, when they were there, they got a lot of clicks. I think the number was like as much as a third of the clicks came through LSAs. And one of the things that we learned is that people didn't know that they were ads because they don't look like ads. They have reviews, they have the Google Guaranteed badge or the Google Screen badge. They have a picture, and they have and the stars. And so people don't see these as ads in the same sense as conventional ads. So they just saw this as another search result, and they're at the top. So they were really clicking through very heavily on there. In contrast, so to go back to self-storage and restaurants, in self-storage, and location is another factor. So that's another thing that I didn't mention. Proximity is an elastic variable. So for a doctor, I'm going to go farther, or a lawyer, I'm going to go farther, or I might not need to travel to that person's office. For a restaurant, I want something near me very often. And for self-storage, I want something near me. So proximity was like a top 2 consideration, and reviews were a consideration. But reviews were not as meaningful in that category as price. So a lot of the title tags had discounts, first month free, 10, X% off. And people were really clicking through on those title tags that had those price incentives. And they didn't care so much about ads. In some categories, people really care about organic versus ads. Notwithstanding the LSA stuff I said, a lot of times we would hear people say, I don't click on ads. They don't have any credibility with me. But in self-storage, people clicked on ads. They made no differentiation between ads and organic traffic or organic links because it didn't really matter. They were looking for what was a kind of a commodity at the best price that was close enough to them and wasn't in a high crime area. And speaking of which, we saw people really looking at photographs in self-storage. They were going through all those GBP carousels to see where is it, how, is it a safe area, etc. And then there were other considerations that entered into it. And then for restaurants, very often you're not going to get a click through to a website at all. And there are a number of categories like this because there's enough information on GBP for them to make a decision. There's a menu, there's a whole bunch of pictures of food in the atmosphere. They can see the reviews and they can check how close it is. And so there are nuances in these categories. And one thing that was really interesting is, people talk about ranking in the local pack as a critical factor, but in these situations where you get a map, this is especially true on the desktop more than mobile, where you get a map and you can browse around the map. You've seen this, and you get a little bubble that pops up, and you can click through to that and load the GBP profile. So that's totally independent of ranking. There's no ranking there. It's just location. And so people were very, very involved, and they would look at lots of those. They would go around and they said, well, this is close to my work, or this is close to my house. And they would look at those, and then they would make decisions after having looked at the GBP material. And it wasn't necessarily about the 3-pack. So the 3-pack caught their eye, but the map on top, they expanded the map and they started engaging with the map. And sometimes they were picking businesses that were not in the 3-pack at all, but were present on the map, and they could move around the map. And so that was quite interesting, also to observe.
Yeah, no, that is really interesting. And for me as a marketer, at least it makes me feel a little bit better about myself being a niche agency versus serving everyone. Because there's, like you were saying, there's so many differences between each industry. It'd be really hard to keep track of all those different user journeys, all that different user intent. So in that sense, I think it does make sense to niche down. And another thing I wanted to ask in terms of variance is I know you guys have done many studies in the US and also in Europe. What is the difference between the US and Europe? How do those compare?
Well, the fundamental difference between the US and Europe is that Google, because of the Digital Markets Act, which is designed to promote competition and designed to protect against so-called self-preferencing, where Google is favoring its own properties at the expense of rivals, Google has made modifications in the search results to accommodate the regulators in Europe. And there's a whole discussion slash argument going on about whether Google has done enough.
Hmm.
But the search results look different in Europe, and it varies sometimes by country. I mean, I think in France, where we did some of this home remodeling research, my recollection is you didn't see that many local packs. It was mostly like ads and organic, and very few local packs. Whereas they
What?
had existed in Ireland. I can show you some screens at some point. So it's kind of in flux in Europe, but the search results look different. The SERP itself looks different. Many Google keeps reminding the regulators that the users in Europe aren't happy with the changes that it's made, but and then you get these carousels. So there's a places sites carousel that appears usually at the top of the search results. So it's either in the immediately above or immediately below the local pack, and you can swipe and get a bunch of different results. And so that was an accommodation to the to competitors. And what we found there is that people didn't interact with them hardly at all. They were basically doing the same things that they always did. But I mean, just a kind of a final point about zero click. And again, I'm sort of citing all these numbers without refreshing my memory, but I think there's Rand Fishkin has been the sort of champion of the zero click research, and I have great respect for Rand and the work that he's doing. But again, it's sort of a generalization. It's a horizontal discussion, and we've seen real differences by category, as I said earlier. So in this home services context, I think it was like 71% of these users, and this is a test condition. It's not real life, but it's approximates it pretty well. People were clicking through to a website, and they were looking at images on the website of these remodeling jobs, these kitchen remodeling jobs. They wanted to see lots and lots and lots of images of what the work that had been done by these firms was, and they clicked through. They spent a lot of time on GBP, and then they clicked through from GBP to the website, and that happened in the vast majority of cases. Now in others, it's very low. In restaurants, it's very, very low. They go through to websites sometimes for menus, even though Google has them. But there are a lot of categories where people will make a decision entirely based on whatever they find on the SERP or GBP. And I think self-storage was one of those too, where they didn't go through to many websites. They did click through occasionally, but for the most part, once they were satisfied, by the images, by the price, etc., they didn't do tons and tons of click-throughs. Sometimes they did to see sizes and things, but not a lot.
Interesting. Okay. And for people that don't know, I'd like you to kind of explain the near media process. Like when someone works with you guys, what exactly are you doing, and how are you gathering all this data, and how are you making sure that it's legitimate? Tell me all about your process.
Right. So we do a number of different kinds of things, but at the core of the stuff that I'm talking about right now, we use a panel that has signed up to do user testing. We understand what the criteria are, maybe mobile users primarily, or people under a certain age, or homeowners, or whatever the criteria are from the client. And then we screen for those, and then we assemble a panel, and we show them, it's all done online, and we show them a scenario. You know, you need to remodel your kitchen, or you're going to go out on Friday night with your friends, and you need to find a restaurant, or you're moving and you need to put your stuff somewhere. And we try not to lead them too much, and we watch, and then we record all those sessions, and we do 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, depending on the budget, depending on the client's desires. And then we painstakingly, this is all manual. It's excruciating in a certain way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not AI, you know, so this is not a machine process. So we got these videos, and they range from like 3 minutes, depending on the complexity of the search, to 15, 20 minutes a piece. And we watch them, and then we record every single thing that the person does, the keywords, where they click, what they say. And we produce a report, a quantitative report, aggregated all the information, and then a qualitative report. And we package those up, and it's a lot of, you know, it's a spreadsheet and a deck, and we show where people clicked, and what the consideration set is, and the top competitors, and it's a ton of information. And we watch it's hours and hours and hours of watching these videos and capturing where is the position of the link that they clicked on, and how many ads appeared on the page, and what were the keywords, and did they refine the keywords, and did they go through to the website, and how many websites, and what business was ultimately chosen, and why, because we asked them to tell us why they chose a particular business. And and so it's a ton of work, but I think the value that the client gets out of it, I mean, I'm obviously representing this product, but and this, there's no monetary relationship between us here, so this is not
no I'm
you're just curious.
I want you
right?
to promote it.
So they do get a lot of value, and they learn things that you can't learn from SEO tools. I mean, SEO tools are great and valuable, but they learn things about behavior that you can't learn from surveys, because surveys are great. I do a lot of surveys, but surveys often and behavior often don't line up. People will say things about what they do which maybe are contradicted by what they actually do. Sometimes that happens. But the behavior doesn't lie, and it's fascinating to be perfectly honest. I just wish I could have I had a twin that could do all the really painstaking work, and I could just look at the results and kind of do the analysis. But it's really interesting. And as I said, everybody, everybody needs to really understand what their users are doing, what the journey is, and that will give them guidance on what to emphasize, where to promote themselves, and what their customers really want to see. I mean, this is sort of basic stuff, but a lot of people don't do the analysis.
Yeah. Okay. So after doing all these tests, is there anything in particular that you found like surprising or shocking that you didn't expect?
Well, the not reading the reviews was a kind of a surprising thing, where people would say, "Oh, reviews are really important. That's my number one thing." But then they didn't read any reviews. They looked at the stars, and they looked at the counts, which makes sense in a certain way because people are trying to be efficient. But that was a surprise. The LSA thing that I told you about, where when LSAs showed up, they got a ton of engagement, and people said, "Oh, this looks interesting. Look at this." But they didn't know that it was an ad. That was something that was really kind of eye-opening. They didn't, in most cases, they had no idea that was actually an ad, which doesn't mean that they can't get a good provider from that. But that was really interesting. The variations is at the highest level, the fact that the behavior was different from vertical to vertical, sometimes slightly, sometimes more dramatically, and the way in which people are generally pretty sophisticated about searching. People understand Google, they understand what, notwithstanding the LSA comments I just made. And then the times where ads mattered and they didn't matter to people, where in some categories, clearly people were just, it doesn't matter. I just want the information. This one is, and brands, people did respond to brands. That conversation has been going on, but we saw it early on, especially in, where there's a known brand. And that's, for lawyers, and that applies to lawyers, but it's going to apply in some of these cases less than others. But like in self-storage, public storage and Big Lots, and not Big Lots, but I don't know all of the storage companies, but there are a number of brands there, and people were really responding to brands. Oh, I know that one. I'm familiar with that one. That was very often what they would say. Oh, I know this one. Click, and they would go through. Now, in something like pest control, people will know Orkin, or maybe there's a couple of brands, and that drives a ton of clicks. And that's been part of this discussion now over the last year, is how brands factor into ranking and click behavior. But really, it's people know brands, they click on brands, Google rewards clicks, the brand ranks higher, so that was another thing that was kind of interesting to observe, is the way in which brands played into people's click behavior.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then also talk to me a little bit about local dialogue. So I know you're thinking about putting that in Near Media. Now it's its own separate thing. What exactly is it?
Well, so it was going to be a research program that was originally going to be part of Near Media, but we decided not to do that because basically it was sort of too removed from the user testing and research that we were doing for multi-location. And Dialogue, Local Dialogue is the URL, localdialogue.com, but the program we call Dialogue is really focused on franchisees, small businesses, agencies that serve small businesses, software companies that serve small businesses. So it's pretty focused. I mean, it's multi-location to the extent there's a franchise there, but it's pretty focused on the SMB end of the market, and then consumers. And that's an annual. So the Near Media stuff, we have a paid newsletter at Near Media, which is a monthly subscription, and then we have these consulting projects that we do that I've described at length. Dialogue is an annual subscription product, and we're capturing data across many of these different questions about how is AI impacting the local market. That's the big question. And so we're trying to get at that through these different populations and understand. So we ask, about budgets, we ask about marketing channels, we ask about AI adoption. Is it having an impact on your bottom line? Where are you seeing benefits? Are you going to hire fewer people in the future? And we ask that to many people, as well as sort of broader local marketing questions. And that's been really fascinating to see. And the one thing I would say about that, I know we're coming up on time here. The one thing I would say about that is that in the past, my experience has always been that you had to drag small businesses kicking and screaming to the next thing, right? It was like they either had to be scared or incentivized in some way to do stuff. Like, you need this internet thing. You have to have a mobile responsive site because your customers are on mobile. And that was very often the tactics that were used. People were saying, if you don't do this, you're going to lose. And now the awareness of this is so high, as I said before. They are embracing this on their own. There are a lot of small business owners that are just using Gemini or ChatGPT and figuring stuff out on their own and doing all kinds of interesting, inventive, creative things. Training manuals and data analysis and marketing copy and email, writing and these functions are all going to be formalized either by startups or by existing SaaS providers that will bring, some tool to market, So they are ahead. Small businesses are actually ahead of enterprises in terms of their adoption. Now, their sophistication is less, but they are, in terms of raw numbers, they're ahead of where enterprises are. I mean, you read a lot about enterprises. Oh, everybody's doing it. And yes, we're rolling out all this functionality and we're laying off so many people because now they're all being replaced by AI agents or whatever. But small businesses have really embraced this for the most part, and they're pretty enthusiastic about it. And it's a great thing for them because they have had trouble hiring people. They've had trouble with resources, costs, and what we need is really people to educate them about where to use this, how to use this, where it can do the best, deliver the best value for them.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That's really surprising. That's good to know. Like I think we were talking about earlier, local businesses have kind of been behind on the marketing curve. So it's nice to see them start picking this up and really get some use case in it. And like I kind of told you before this, I'm really passionate about helping local businesses. So the fact that they're able to use this technology to advance their business, I think that's a game changer. So it's awesome.
Yeah, and it's great that you're doing that because they need that help. And one final stat that was really surprising to me. This comes from the dialogue side, not the near media side. We asked them what they use. What marketing channels to use. What do you think is most effective? And only 43%. This is just, we've done a few surveys, but this is just one particular survey I'm referencing now. Only 43% of these local businesses, and this is 1 to 499 hit count. Only 43% had claimed their business profiles, which is shocking. It's shocking. Now, don't, again, this is one survey, but it's directionally kind of shocking because I would have thought everybody is now focused on Google. Everybody recognizes the Google value proposition. But you know what? Google has made it really frustrating for a lot of business owners and really difficult for a lot of business owners. And there's not a lot of support. I mean, Mike is a product expert, and there are a lot of dedicated product experts that do a great job. But I think they're frustrated. The verification process and suspensions, and they don't know what the rules are. And what's much more straightforward for them and easy and intuitive is social media. And they're all on social media as a result. And Google, tried for a while to educate small businesses, and they've kind of given up that effort, and they're relying on people like you or people like Mike or whomever is out there sort of giving advice to do that work. They've outsourced that. Essentially, the education and support function has largely been outsourced to people like you guys. And
wow,
it's too bad because I think this is really the lifeblood of many businesses. This is the bottom of the funnel stuff. And if you're there and you have an optimized presence and it's engaging, people will choose you. And if you're not there, you're missing out. And there are a lot of businesses for whom that's make or break.
Dang, that is a crazy stat. No, I have seen tons of pest control companies where they just have a Facebook page and they still have a decent business. They've they're not doing $1 million, but
it's word of mouth.
Yeah, no, so I mean, I've seen it. It works. No website, no Google Business Profile. I'm like, how are you even running a business here? It doesn't make complete sense to me. But no, it definitely works. But I will cut this off. I know I want to be respectful of your time. One last question I'd actually like to ask you, which I usually like to ask, is what is one of the biggest lessons you've learned in the past few years?
You mean a work-related or a life-related lesson?
Either one. I like both.
Oh my God.
That's a tough one, right?
Well, I mean, there's too much to do. And so, you really need to sort of prioritize, create boundaries, do what you can, but don't expect perfection. And, try and enjoy your life a little bit, because in this world of technology and digital marketing, you can just work and work and work and work and work all the time. And I've got these two things going, and plus another separate consulting thing. And it's like, I just really have to manage my time and guard against burnout. And, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that I've learned, but that's one that I continuously work on to try and do the best work I can, but at the same time, not kill myself so that I'm no good to anybody eventually.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Using your time effectively. Awesome. Well, I think that was a great podcast, Greg. Where can people find you online, on social media, learn more about you and your services?
So you can go to nearmedia.co, not .com, nearmedia.co. That's the Near Media side. You can go to localdialogue.com with a com, not a co. That's the dialogue stuff. And you can just find me as I'm at G Sterling on what used to be called Twitter, and I'm on Blue Sky and Threads and all these places, which I don't post on. In Mastodon, I don't post on all of them, too many channels. Or you can just email me at greg.sterling at gmail. Search for me.
Okay, awesome. All those links will be in the description, and anything else you'd like to plug or mention?
I've done a lot of plugging. I mean, you've encouraged me to do a lot of plugging. No, there's nothing else I want to mention. I mean, I just think, you're fighting the good fight for these small businesses. It's important that they get real good advice to succeed. And there's a lot of snake oil and smoke and mirrors out there. People trying to aggressively sell small businesses on on crappy products or services that they don't need. And so, I commend you for doing this work, and for people like you who are just, have integrity and are trying to actually help, rather than just make money and run, which
Yeah.
is
No,
many
thank you. I
people are
truly
trying to do.
appreciate that. And by the way, I commend you as well for it takes people like you coming on the podcast, because honestly, I am a younger guy. I'm slightly newer to the game. So having people like you with, 25 years in the industry, that's people want to listen to you. They don't want to listen to me, at least not
No,
yet.
that's not true. I mean, they're showing up for your podcast, so they do want to
No,
listen to
that's
you,
true.
and you're facilitating these conversations, which is great, and which is a great skill. And I mean, my passion is this local stuff. How the internet influences our interactions with businesses and people in the real world, how we make decisions. That's always been my thing. This sort of online to offline process, which has gotten more complicated over the last, let's call it 5 to 7 years, but that's where the action really is. E-commerce is sexy and people want to talk about it, but really what's going on is that people use the internet as a tool to figure out what to do and what to buy and where to go in real life.
Yeah, awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the show, Greg. I think this was awesome. I think my audience will find it super valuable. And yeah, I appreciate your time, and I hope we stay in touch.
Thanks very much. Of course.
Of course. All right, cool.